if anybody knows about Reinhold, he's one of the great legendary climbers of all time. He was the first to climb Everest with no oxygen. He also climbed it with no oxygen by a new route solo. He's a remarkable human being, and he's also one of the great writer philosophers of climbing. He's also a hard ass and is a bit of a difficult person, as he will probably admit himself. I photographed him in this vacant ballroom of this old historic hotel, just the two of us, and he was giving me the Reinhold attitude, and I was looking through Hasselblad, looking at him, and he's just a terse Teutonic. And finally I looked up and I said, "Reinhold, you're scaring all of us." And I said that for all of humanity, all of us.
Welcome to the show, Jim.
Hi, thanks. Nice to be here.
I'm really excited to have you on the show today. I've been diving into your work, and I was introduced to you through Steve when he was editing the Italian version of the book, The Climbers, which I'm really excited about jumping into a little bit later. But just for those that don't know you, could you just tell us who you are?
Yeah, I'm Jim Herrington, and most people know me as a photographer, sometimes writer. I've shot portraits of the has-beens, never-wases, and sometimes great stars of the music biz. I've also done a book called The Climbers, where I went around the world for 20 years photographing legends of 20th century climbing.
Were you always into photography, or was it something that found you?
Found me, or I found it? That's a good question. I think I was always a photographer. I grew up in the early 60s. I was born. My father had a bunch of Life magazines, as I usually remember it going. And just as a 4-year-old crawling around on the floor, I remember looking at these full bleed Life magazine spreads, black and white, edge to edge. Being on my hands and knees on the floor, looking at these incredible views of Europe, South Pole, and these people and places and things. And, completely captivated from a very early age. It took a while to figure out what these things even were, because at some point you just take it for granted when you're 3 years old. Everything is the world. Is that a photograph? Is that reality? It takes a while to figure out, oh, these are photographs. Oh, somebody took them. Oh, somebody had a career taking these, comes.
Yeah.
But I think that from the first time seeing photographs, I was a photographer before I even touched a camera.
How were you self-taught, or did you find your way into a class? How did you develop yourself and your skills?
I guess I was self-taught. I did briefly go to art photography school, but dropped out. But before that, I was, basically grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and there wasn't a lot in the museum gallery world to choose from, but we did have a place called the Light Factory. Once I was in my teens, there would be an occasional good show, but I'd go to the library with my father a lot, and I was definitely in the cinema and photography section a lot. And both of those things, I think, were influential equally to me as a photographer, certainly cinema. So I was buying these, or borrowing these books that were, very photographic from a very young age, and wondering how they did it, getting books for Christmas. I started getting books by the great legends, Winogrand, Ansel Adams, but Avedon, all of them. And just really studying, being fascinated by the craft of it. And just, in wonder as a young man, how do you do this? How does one do this? So I guess you could say it's self-taught, but, you also choose your teachers. If you claim that you're self-taught, you're still getting taught by people, but you're choosing these people, anywhere you can get it. If you feel like they have something, you go and start asking. So, of course, you're getting many teachers along the way, but I guess when you say you're self-taught, you're curating these people, the ones you want to bring close to you. And so it's a combination, but I think it was just a lot of research, a lot of books, a lot of galleries, museums, anywhere I could see actual photography in person, I would go.
When did it switch for you? You were like, I want to do this. And what was the first kind of assignment or project, or that was like, yes, this is what I'm going to do? Do you have that moment?
I don't know if there was probably several of them, but I'll backtrack a bit to that childhood with the Life magazines. We also had an old, probably used Encyclopedia Britannica, probably from the late 1950s. And I loved the encyclopedia. I just loved getting a random letter, F, G, whatever, just pull it out and start looking at the surprises of, especially the places. I loved geography. I loved, my earliest loves was travel, or the idea of travel, before I had done any, but other lands, other places, completely fascinated. We also had the globe, and we had an atlas. And a simple household, but those things, the Life magazine, which were still very journalistic, but, those 1940s, 30s Life magazines, they had Margaret Bourke White and Walker Evans, and people of that caliber shooting. So there was a kind of an artistic journalist viewpoint. But then that encyclopedia had a very meat and potatoes kind of photography, this kind of, these photographers that did it for a living. So it's very crafted. Here's a photo of, the Taj Mahal or whatever, kind of beautiful black and white. Nothing really artistic, but I still love that kind of utilitarian photography, especially of these places. It's kind of perfectly lit, like the Kodak manual might teach you.
Indexical, very, yeah. Your encyclopedia had pictures in it, which you must have had the nice one.
They weren't glossy. There was no color. I'm pretty sure there was no color. Black and white. And they were probably stock photos, possibly from the 1940s. Because back then, they didn't update. Yeah, this is a perfectly fine photo of the Taj Mahal from 1942. We'll use it again until they change the front of it. So,
that's funny.
And then the globe and the atlas, they just started, I would see something in the magazine of, Kuwait or whatever it was. Istanbul, I was fascinated with for a while. Constantinople. I would look on the atlas. And it slowly started dawning on me, these people in Life magazine, these old Life magazines, wow, these people are going there. So, and as a young boy, that started really seeming attractive to me. Wow, you could not only go travel to these interesting places, but it could be part of your job. I mean, what you do on Earth, and report back with your kind of own personal interpretation of a place. And once I kind of got the inkling of that, all bets were off. was what I guess that's the moment you're asking for. And it wasn't even having a camera in my hand moment. It was just once I realized what the possibility was with a camera, I think that's when it...
That's fascinating. Like it was an encyclopedia. It was, the Time magazines and the Life magazine, National Geographic. I'm a little older. That I'm not. I remember that time before the internet, and for you to think about a place, it was in these. I think I had the same fascination. It's probably what pulled me into photography as well, and so that's really, really interesting. Now, was your family? Where did they do like? What, were they artistic? Were they photographer? Did they do anything like that, or was this a complete deviation?
I come from a small town, not Charlotte. Before we moved to Charlotte, kind of a small town life, a little bit. It was difficult for me to even find some of these things. I think it would have been a lot more complicated for my parents to be exposed to stuff.
Sure.
In that time and place, they certainly had creative eyes, and my dad went on to paint and do things later on. But the household itself, it wasn't some bohemian artist enclave by any means. No.
Sure. That's interesting. You're kind of fascinated by this. You decided, you said your decisive moment was when you were young. You were like, hey, this could happen. What project kind of launched you into becoming, I hate using the word professional, but making this your livelihood? I know in a previous interview, you said Tom Petty kind of gave you a shot when you were kind of hanging out, and taking photos with him. Was that the moment, or was it before that?
No, it was, it would have been, so anyway, I guess I'll have to continue if you want to hear the whole story.
I want to hear it. Yeah, that's what we're here for. It's long form.
Okay. Yeah. Form. Before Petty, way before all that stuff, I had a dinky little camera I got for Christmas. And then maybe a few Christmases later, I got a little less dinky camera. And then I guess when I was 13, I got my first 35 millimeter film camera, a Pentax K1000, probably for Christmas or birthday or something. And, I was very proud of this camera. It just seemed like such a intimidating machine. And it's something I wanted very badly. I wanted to keep getting deeper into this photography, but suddenly, I felt this responsibility that I had to do good pictures, and it was intimidating because photography is hard. And I'd been looking at all these masters, looking at all these books, and getting it in a certain way, like you get things when you like them, like a song, like, you might like a song so much you think you could write one like that, and then you sit there on the guitar and it's like, holy shit. Can't just sit and write a Beatles song so easy. And it's the same.
Or get something you like. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's just incredible, disappointing results when you first start doing this film camera. But I did love music. There was a lot of music in the household, and I was lucky with my parents. Both had very, very good taste in music. I was exposed to good stuff. So it started me early, being pretty, passionate about music. And Benny Goodman was played around the house a lot. And when I was 13, Benny Goodman, who must have been quite old at this point, came to Charlotte. And my dad said, would you like to go see him? I'm like, of course. And I took my brand new 35 millimeter Pentax. So we went to see him, and we're on the front row. There's not many people there. Benny Goodman would have sold out 50 years before that. But so I asked my dad, I said, do you think I can sneak up there and get a picture? And he's like, I don't know. But I go up to the stage, I shoot a few frames, and I slink back to the seat. And I ended up developing this film in my high school, junior high school, I guess, darkroom. And it's the first roll of film I ever developed, and I just about boiled the emulsion off the film base by washing it too hot. I thought if 68-degree water will clean it, surely 100 will clean it even faster. Lesson learned. I was a bad dark.
High contrast.
Oh my God. It was terrible. I was so disappointed. I immediately learned that 68 degrees is here for a reason.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's important.
I had this molten emulsion, and I put it away. I tried making one print, and it was terrible. So, but I later saved it. We'll see it. I've got the picture once I became a better printer. I actually salvaged it, but that was my first moment. I got up there with a legend, Benny Goodman. Hard to get bigger than that. The king of swing. So, that was, I don't know if it was a transformative moment about telling me this or that, but it was my first, I'd been looking at those old 1930s Life magazines, and I enjoyed testing out on the dog in the neighbor's house and, looking at shadows and kind of practicing focusing. But I knew pretty early on that I needed some kind of story going on, the pretty pictures of, when you're so young and naive, a tree is amazing, or a ball, just intersecting shadows. You're looking at the world in a new way through this square or a rectangle. So it's all fascinating, but it didn't take long for me to realize I wanted more than just geometry. I wanted some kind of story. I mean, I actually do like abstract stuff and non-narrative photography, but that's what I started wanting personally.
Yeah. You wanted a story. And so Benny kind of started you like down a path. And so talk to me a little bit. Go ahead.
I mean, I guess it did, or at least that was the beginning of a path that I already knew that I wanted to be. I mean, I was looking at these WPA photographers and those F8 people. That kind of tied in with the Life magazine stuff. But then I was also starting to get a little more arty, and I was getting Gary Winogrand books and Henri Cartier-Bresson and Robert Frank, and these kind of people that had a much different kind of narrative than the news around the world, like Life magazine would have shown. This was now, it was the beatnik thing, kind of. I mean, these people with photography were what Bob Dylan was to songwriting. It's like it starts to become your journalism, right, in some way. So that was eye-opening and interesting, and yet more valuable, interesting stuff to put in my baggie of tricks and interests. And the more I got into the history of the photography, going back into the 1800s and these approaches that were either dictated by cultural changes and also technology, the camera coming off the tripod once, handheld became possible. All those changes were, I just loved everything about photography. I loved the way it reflected cultural, technological, scientific, travel. All these things seemed to be possible with the camera. It showed us the history of our world. It could be artistic. There was a bunch of years there when I was young where like every little thing I learned was just like, wow, I love it. I love it. Every museum show and just getting a little piece of the big puzzle of photography. I was obsessed for a long time, spent a lot of time looking at books. But you're talking about my moment. I'm trying to think. I don't know if there was a moment. I think it was a bunch of...
You had a few... No, it was, I literally see you on the floor and in your house with a Life magazine, flipping through those images, just being transported to a new place.
I mean, that could have been the first time that I realized somebody went and did this.
Yeah. And then that through a camera, you were transported through that place that you kind of wanted to be on the other end of that camera. And so you just found moments to do that. And, I read in an interview that you just started taking portraits of people that you were interested in. You were like, I just don't take an image unless I'm interested in that person, So were you getting assignments or were you just chasing
No, I was
people and things that you were interested in and you were just kind of going there? And is that kind of what kind of kept pulling you, or was just a fascination, an obsession, kind of talk to me about that.
It's still what pulls me, but
yeah.
I want,
me too.
I was assigning myself, and I still do, Life magazine jobs from the 1930s. I was setting myself, and I was taking them very seriously, as if there were a client, and as if it mattered. But to me, it did. I wanted the craft to be good. I wanted it to be interesting. I was getting more and more influenced by movies and cinematography, of course, and photographers. And I couldn't wait. I was young. I was very impatient. When is somebody going to start sending me to get these people? Well, in some ways, they never did, like for these particular people. Some of these people sometimes were only photographed by me. It just was, if I didn't go do it, it wouldn't have happened.
That right there, I wish some people would just hear. Like, some people are just waiting for someone to go, okay, it's now your turn, but sometimes you just got to go and do it. And sometimes the fact of you actually having some of the images is because you just wanted to, and you just did it. And I think there is something really, really magical about that. And it shows up in your work. Just the authenticity. I hate that word authentic, but just the real nature to it, the magic behind your images. And so I want to commend you on that, because like that piece right there is, I wish people would stop waiting and just go. And so I wanted to pull that out and hear a little bit more about that and what that meant to you. And you were kind of self-assigning and kind of going for it. And so keep telling me a little bit more about that.
For a long time, I felt, I didn't feel great about it, because I felt when I was younger that I should be getting assigned to do these things. That would make me valid. If someone, I remember, this is almost embarrassing, but when I was, I don't know how old I was, maybe 12 or 13, maybe 14, but I guess I was in a graphics class, and we were doing silk screening and, dabbling in all the letter typeset and things. But I made some, of course, bootlegged IDs, probably so I could drink. But I also made a press pass. I'd never seen a press pass, but I'd heard of them. I'd seen them in movies, press, the card in a guy's hat in a 1930s movie with a big Ouija camera.
Yeah, I remember those. Yeah.
And I was so hungry to be taken seriously as some kind of photojournalist way before I was qualified. But as I started finding these stories that I was interested in and going out and photographing them, there was a point where I thought, why is no one interested in these things? There was a lot of doubt and stuff, I guess, when I was younger, but those went away once you learn that, the cool stuff is the stuff you give yourself most of the time. I mean,
yeah, isn't that so true? It's so true.
Satisfying, great stuff is always self-assignment, really. But it took a long time to kind of get there. And we'll talk about my book, The Climbers, later, but that is a case in point. And we'll go into that whenever you're ready. But that was the embodiment of this question, really.
A self-assignment. And so, I love that. And it's so true. It's so much of this podcast is kind of a self-assignment. It's a pure fascination that's kind of pulling me to meet all these people and talk to all these folks about images. And so in now I'm sitting here talking to you, which is absolutely fascinating. But there's something about that self-initiation that is really, really, really important. And I think needs to be heard today. And I think a lot of us are, social media has given us this instant gratification, this instant validation. It's almost so shallow, but the only validation that's important is your own. And it's the one that you give yourself. And you just said it, which I love, is that like some of my favorite projects or like some of the best things that I think I've ever done were self-assigned. Why do you think that is? Why? Is it because it's the sparkle in my eye that, that it's that tingle that you get? What is it? What is it?
I mean, I don't know. In my case, I guess I've got some probably obscure interests, maybe more than the mainstream sometime. So a lot of these people that I've gone after are, some of my greatest, to me, successes are, success as far as photographs are people that no one's ever heard of. A small amount of people that have been kind of life-changing for me. These, obscure musicians that I went after of Americana, and that was, I guess we'll segue into self-assignment as before the Tom Petty and all that stuff, I wanted to document music that I thought was valid and interesting, which took me down this road of kind of blues, country, hillbilly, rock and roll, but early stuff, kind of early to mid 20th century, mostly American music, but not necessarily. And I really liked finding the people that weren't exactly famous at the time. Also, early on, I started being interested in finding these kind of forgotten people. I used to like doing that with forgotten buildings and abandoned buildings, and you can fill the stories. But I started, I guess, doing that with my photography. If everybody was out trying to photograph somebody, that's the last thing I'd want to do is be another one of the horde. I kind of like the pursuit of finding someone who's maybe hard to get to and a little bit who's off sitting somewhere with a whole bunch of secret stories.
The Climbers is coming into focus, which is, it makes a lot of sense now that you're kind of telling me a little bit about that. I had to learn that about myself. Those patterns that I kept going back to, I don't think they were obvious to even me for a long time until I started seeing that this is something that I do naturally without thinking about it. You're someone that does a very good job it seems connecting with the other person on the other end. And I think that curiosity is probably the key to that curiosity, the mutual respect. What do you think is like the big key for a good portrait for you?
The key to a good portrait?
For you, like what are you looking for, like in particular? Because it seems like I get a different answer from every single person, and a lot of it is very personal. And so I'm kind of curious what the key for you. What are you looking for in there?
It's an interesting question, and I don't know if I have the answer. And I feel like if I almost don't want to know the answer because
you don't want to do. So that could be the answer, and maybe it's instinct, maybe it's intuitive, maybe it's.
Well, yeah. I mean, I know it when I see it, and that's
there. You go.
I mean, so much, especially. I mean, I love the studio. I love controlled studio lighting. I love big Fresnel lenses and Mole Richardson lights. Doing things with strobes. I love the laboratory that is the studio and the control and the experimentation. But so much of what I've done kind of necessitates not being in the studio. It's a lot of location work and going to, extremely unpredictable situations where you got to think fast about how to turn this, lemon into lemonade. A lot of times, just some horrendous either textural backgrounds or abysmal lighting. So but you also need to engage with this person, and oftentimes someone, in my case, they're very old, and you've just come into the room with them, and you see that the light is disappearing, but you don't want to come in too antsy and agitate someone who's 100 years old in some cases.
Sure.
What makes a good portrait? I know it when I see it. I spent so many years really trying to get good at the craft. In the dark room, focus, depth of field, printing, tonality, processing negatives, and taking the craft very seriously, studying from the best, looking at Irving Penn, looking at Bill Brandt, just looking, why did they print it like that? What does it mean to print it like that? What would it have meant had he printed it really flat instead of super contrasty? I really dove deep in all these questions. My first job when I moved to Hollywood was working for Tom Consilvio, who was Gary Winogrand's personal printer, and other people like that. And he was a real tough Boston guy. I was a young greenhorn, and I'd started off sweeping the front steps and making coffee, and gradually I started developing film. But I asked him one day, I said, one of these days you need to really teach me how to print. I mean, I knew how to print, but I wanted, the master to show me. And in his Boston kind of attitude, he said, you make it lighter, you make it darker. And he kind of like half walked away, but then he kind of leaned back in and he said, the secret is knowing what it's supposed to look like. And then he walked away. But there wasn't a moment in the darkroom of 1,000 sessions I spent in the darkroom that I didn't think about that statement.
That is an awesome point. That is a really good point.
It sounds simple. Like, knowing what it's supposed to look like is a deep concept. And when you start to look at that Irving Penn print, those platinum prints, or again, like Bill Brandt, these decisions that were made across the history of photography through these eras of the technological changes from glass plate to daguerreotypes to salt negatives to roll film. What we see is based on that person's decision, what it's supposed to look like. And that's something I've taken very seriously. So what is a good portrait, you ask me? I mean, the problem, unless you're with a model or something, but even then, you have to trust the accidents, because I was going to say you're working with live humans, maybe not so much if you're crafting a still life, but you got to be open to the accidents and what they remind you of. I've been teaching these workshops, and I tell the students, I tell them about building a strong visual vocabulary. If you want to be a photographer or maybe an artist of any type, really. I mean, certainly any artist. If you're a musician, you want to listen to everything so it informs your... And it's the same with photography. I think it's valuable to just look at so much stuff. So when you're in these situations of difficulty, you have kind of a wide range of attitudes that may affect you emotionally. If you're not in a studio and you've got your light that you usually use, and you're giving a Rembrandt lighting with a rim light, you could have that planned for the studio. But if you're out on location in the street in Rome, and I thought it was going to be sunny, but now it's raining, you sort of, besides all the technical stuff, I think you need an emotional vocabulary. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. Draw
100%.
And what do
100%.
This guy? Well, he's a comedian. I thought I was going to shoot him all funny, and it was supposed to be sunny today, but now it's raining. But, you got to be prepared for, maybe some emotional narrative to bring into it. And just, everything's kind of accidental when you're in these locations, but you have to be prepared for these accidents. And they need to rebound off you, I guess, in some way that sometimes kind of quick. So beyond the stuff, I think you need to be prepared for all these crazy juxtapositions, because, you can move the camera just an inch and it changes the mood, the flavor, the temperament. So what makes a good portrait? I don't know. I know it when I see it.
Yeah, and that's so true. And let me ask you this: do you spend time with the person you're about to take an image of beforehand? Do you try to talk to them, or do you kind of how do you go about it?
That's another thing that you may not want to, one may not want to examine too closely, lest they taint.
You're so full of wisdom. They call it, there's a good book. It's called Buddha at the Gas Pump. It's one of these moments, yeah, I love that. It's sometimes you don't want to. It's almost like look under the...
I mean, I've been told that I have a way with people. So I suppose I do. And I suppose... Well, I don't suppose. I know that's part of the process. I mean, with the musicians, music is a big part of my life. I know a lot about it. I've spent a lot of time and energy. I really listen to records. I play guitar. All my friends are musicians. I know enough about the producing, the writing, the history that I guess with a lot of musicians, I guess I fit in a little bit. Maybe that's, I don't, I would
how their world works.
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. But I would hate to examine myself too closely. I did think about it one time where, because I'm doing a lot of location stuff, and I do travel with a pretty small kit, which is also a part of what I teach in my workshop is, how to get, some amazing portraiture with a unamazing kit, small amount of gear, next to nothing, even maybe just a camera. But I think maybe sometimes people think I'm an amateur when they see how little I work with sometimes. I don't have a bunch of soft boxes and strobes going off and assistants. So maybe they let their guard down because of that. I don't really know.
I think it's a great opportunity to dive into some of the images that you've taken, and you have so many portraits that you've done, and I know this is just going to be a small sample. So let's go ahead and share the screen, and we'll take a look. Let's take a look at some of them.
All right, this is in no particular order, as I told you earlier. This is Billy Joe Shaver. He just died a few years ago. Legendary Texas songwriter and actually a great performer, singer.
Yeah.
I shot this on 4x5 camera in Luck, Texas. This is at Willie Nelson's ranch outside of Austin, Texas. Talk about accidents. You have to be ready for them. There's Jesus with his fingers up, and there's Billy Joe who lost his fingers in a sawmill accident when he was young. Sometimes these things happen, and they're very fortuitous.
Yeah, you're just kind of playing with it. Yeah.
So this was, I think, for an album cover. It was an outtake. Like a lot of my favorite photos, they were never used. The ones I liked,
oh, wow.
Never saw the light of day by the record company. But I shot Billy Joe's several times through the years. We were friends, and there was some nice light. I remember coming in kind of horizontal and low and kind of glistening, some kind of Texas light, kind of glow light.
And it seems like they get very comfortable with you, and being playful with you. Do you have a light atmosphere when you're around, when you're taking portraits? Or
I really,
you just being yourself, just kind of.
I don't know if I'm even doing that. I mean, I may not be being. I mean, if I was myself, it might change things. Maybe I'm pretending.
Yeah,
I'm in a mode. I take it seriously, but I think it is. Maybe I make it feel kind of casual, I guess.
Sure.
I don't think it's a high pressure thing it would probably be helpful to have somebody I've worked with and ask them, but I mean, I've had very energetic shoots, like in the studio, and sometimes you have music playing and things. You do want an energetic scene for a particular situation. And I can get very animated and energetic in those situations, but not always. I think a lot of the things I do maybe don't depend on that, as we'll see. I think you'll probably notice as we go through these pictures, they're not exactly, Gaga Entertainment Weekly covers. They're a little more noir, perhaps. We'll see.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed that when I looked through your work. So
this is Charlie Rich, who was an amazing musician that started off on Sun Records in Memphis, which was where Elvis Presley had his original beginnings, and Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins and Jerry Lee Lewis. They all started in this tiny little studio run by Sam Phillips in Memphis in the 50s. But Charlie went on after those years had some hits in the 70s, great pianist and songwriter and vocalist, one of my all-time favorites. This was a job for some small magazine, and again, I didn't really care who was hiring me. If somebody gave me access to one of these people that I would have wanted to photograph anyway,
I love how it's not a typical portrait. These images have a life to them. It's almost candid it almost feels like a candid moment with personality. It's just interesting. The cigarette hanging out's perfect.
Yeah, just it does help to have some time to spend. I had already photographed him in a hotel. We met in a hotel. Okay. Did some photos there that, frankly, weren't that good. I didn't like the setting. It's kind of a modern hotel and with those kind of ugly, kind of purple patterned curtains and, kind of terrible wall texture. I don't know, sheetrock wall. Just nothing good. Brass, metal fixtures, just all the things I don't like. Bad textures. Bad textures usually, to me, mean they're doing something bad to the light. A lot of modern walls, they just throw the light back at you. I like things that kind of absorb the light a little bit, or things that light kind of go into instead of getting thrown back at you. Sheet brass polished fixtures, sheetrock, those are all no-nos in my book. Well, here's a famous one from my archive. I photographed Dolly Parton 3 times through the years. This was the second time. And we basically mostly alone. I just... so crazy to think of it. All day at this cabin outside of Nashville, and we shot into the night, and this is candlelight. Me outside looking in the window.
I was going to ask you about this. You photographed with her 3 times. Was she asking for you in particular?
There's a good story about that. I live in Nashville now, but I was gone for 20 years. The first time I lived here was in the 90s. And I had a friend who had broken up with his girlfriend, was living on my couch for several weeks. And he had been rehearsing in the garage with a band. And he came home one night and he said, "You'll never guess what happened." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Dolly Parton came to the garage, a stinky garage, and watched us rehearse." Well, it turns out the lead singer was the cousin of Dolly. So I said, "That's amazing." So about a week later, a few days later, he came home and he said, "You'll never guess what happened." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Dolly sang a song with us. Dolly Parton in this stinky garage sang a song with us." And I said, a few days later, he comes home and he said, "You'll never believe it, but Dolly Parton wants to record an album with us." So I immediately think, and Dolly is someone who fits into my category of someone I want to, besides her acting and her super major celebrity status, she's a great songwriter, and especially those early records she made. With and without Porter Wagner, there's some classic, great country stuff. And so I wanted to put her in the documentary. So I said, "How do I get in on this?" And he said, "Bring your portfolio over and, drop it off." So I took it over there to the garage, to the cousin. And, I had my photos in there, but there was one photo of a dead possum that I had photographed on a 4x5 camera. It's a long story of an animal that died in my backyard, but it was kind of a homage to Peter Beard, his aerials of elephants dead in Africa.
Yeah.
Sort of remembered that. And this possum had kind of rotted away to just the skeletal outline, a little bit of fur, but it's a skeleton of a possum. So, it's kind of a beautiful shot, and it was in the portfolio. And before I left, I said, "Let me take out this picture of the dead possum. This is not going to get me any favors with anybody, probably." And they said, "I'll leave it in there." So I said, okay. So I went away for a few days. They called me up and said, come back and pick up your portfolio. So I went over there and said, what did Dolly think? They said, oh, she liked it. She was looking through. She liked the pictures. She got to the picture of the dead possum and said, that's who I want to shoot my album cover. So I got the job because of the dead possum. And then I
that's so amazing. Yeah, I love that. It's, she's singing in garages with her cousin and is attracted to your dead possum. She's just looking for something different. And I love that.
We ended up meeting somewhere in some office somewhere, and she was great. He told me a few dirty jokes, actually. And I told her, I said, Dolly, you've been doing these kind of airbrush butterfly kind of fantasy album covers. That's not the way I do things. It's probably going to be kind of bleak and black and white. And, to her credit, she goes, I know what you do. So she did her research. I mean, she checked me out as you should, but she knew what she was getting into, and that's what she wanted. And this was kind of a back to the roots kind of album. And so it worked for that. So, now this is the second time I shot her, but the first time, tons of black and white. And she'd been in the studio with these crazy dresses and probably a million lights. And I ended up shooting her the first time handheld, push process Tri-X in a Leica, pretty down and dirty. And it got some great shots. They really, ended up, she called me back a couple years later, so I guess she liked them as well.
Yeah. Well, the second one, the next one down with her is it's very famous. I love this shot. This shot here. Yeah.
And we had a concept of her kind of traveling around in a car. So it was slightly set up with the car that we rented and things, but I kind of liked having the car there, but not making too big of a deal out of it.
Yeah.
Not sitting her on the hood or something silly.
Exactly. It seems so like there's with your style, it's like the way you shoot. You can go to the next one too, if you'd like, but
yeah, it's the one that is, as far as my gallery goes, the best-selling print that I sell of all my prints.
I keep using this word. There's it's the way you get these images. It's almost natural in a way. There's no acting. There's a lot of like famous people to shoot with them. They put on a face and they turn on, when they know they're about to get an image taken or whatever. But with you, you it seems like you cut through the noise and you get to something a little deeper. And I guess that's what fueled my question earlier. How do you do that? Like,
well,
is that the intuition that you were talking about? I'm like, how do I get that? Did they sell that at the store? Does Walgreens have some of that? Like, what?
People give me that face. It's not like they don't give it to me, but I choose not to shoot it, or I'll shoot it to placate them also, I mean,
give them that one. Yeah, that's interesting.
You can't be bossy. I mean, you've got to let people do what they want to do and then try some different things. And Dolly is very well rehearsed with her 50,000 watt smile, and she's great at it. And she looks great at it. But, and I have those shots. I mean, that last shot is one of them, but I want to see something different. I want to see if I can get beyond a lot of people ask me about the essence of a person and the truth of a person. I don't really believe in those concepts because I don't think there is this one face that is the essence of someone. We're
I
complicated.
don't think so either.
We're complicated creatures. We have so many facets.
Absolutely.
But at least I would like to get something that's not too put on, and, try to get something that's not too actorly. I mean, sometimes it's fun to act up and have people be a character. That's fun sometimes, but
I just think you have this great ability to cut through, and that's the best way that I can explain it. And, especially when you see Dolly Parton has been photographed so many times, and you just kind of see a facade of a person, which is probably one of the most famous people in the world. Oh, at least where I'm from, but is, and you seem to like have this ability to get there. And I think it's amazing. And you did it with, Charlie Rich, and just as we go through this, I'm sure I'm going to continue to see this.
But yeah, talking about the posing and everything, I mean, in these workshops that I teach with people, students, and what have you, a lot of people, they talk about that they're shy, to deal with people. How do you get up in someone's face and do that? I'm too shy to do it. And I guess I was that way too. And, even in the beginning, I kind of saw myself as maybe a street photographer when I was really young. I liked those Cartier-Bressons and Robert Frank, Gary Winogrand, on and on. And to get up in people's faces and deal with people, I guess it was intimidating to me too. It's an interesting thing. The psychology of how you deal with people is probably related to how you deal with them all the time, perhaps.
Well, you have you said people tell you have a way with people, and it shows up in your. For me, it's like I love taking portraits. I wouldn't have imagined
I'd be moving a cigarette out of Charlie Rich's mouth, or just touching people, getting close to people like that. It is an acquired taste or acquired skill.
It's interesting.
And I'm not looking for the big smiles, because I guess that's the easy thing. Give me your Dolly face, Dolly. Give me the big hand on the hips, kind of pout. It's too easy and too predictable to go that route. And I might do it to get people warmed up and give them a sense that, okay, we got that out of the way, if that's what you think you need. But
are you just curious about people in general? Do you think you have a natural fascination for them?
Certainly some people, not all people. There's some people. I'm not like.
I would agree with that.
I'm not an up with people guy. I'm a up with some people guy.
Yeah.
I'm not that warm and fuzzy, but yeah, I do like people. I travel a lot. I like meeting people. I don't want to photograph everybody. That's for sure. But yeah. I guess I like people. I like people that I like. I like, especially when there's a story and a history. But I also like places and things that have emanate a kind of story or a history as well. So here's the Black Keys, two guys in a car.
I love that.
Yeah, I've been shooting them for a few years, I guess. Bands are hard. You've got to, if you want to shoot them the way I like shooting, which is what we've been talking about, shooting 4 or 5 people in a band is just difficult. And after doing it for decades, like I have been, it's still a problem to solve. How do you, besides putting someone in front of a backdrop and all that, what do you do with 4 or 5 people that you haven't done yet? But this is good because it's 2 guys, and one person is great. 2 people, they have a reason to hang out. You start getting into 3 and 4 people, And it's like, why are all these people together? Well, they're in a band, so you've got to keep it like a band shot. But with two guys, you can be on a road trip, just something to shake it up and make it fun and interesting.
The composition's really nice. Yeah, I love it. And it tells its own story, and it's not so typical, not a typical band shot. I really like this over the head shot down here too. This higher perspective. I love the playing with the shadows. That's another great way of shooting two people as well.
Oh, you're talking about the next?
Yeah, the next one. This one here. Yeah, I like that one too.
We were out. They're friends of mine, these guys, but we had a job to do. They needed an album cover. And, believe it or not, I don't know if you ever saw the old Robert Johnson vinyl album that everybody had that knew who Robert Johnson was. He's sitting in a chair and you're kind of looking down on him. It's a painting, but we kind of used it as this influence of something we were going to do with them. But we strayed wildly from that concept, and we were trying to get a ladder. We were looking for all these things, but we ended up out at this little airport, and this kind of came together by accident, and it ended up being kind of super lucky, fortuitous finding. And the light happened to be right. And, you got to be ready for this stuff. We saw the shadows, everything was just kind of wonderful for this moment. And these guys are great. We did a bunch of passings, just to get all the moments right, the feet right, and the hand.
I think it's great. I also like the little pop of blue in there too.
Yeah, and a kind of a
nice
shot.
Yeah, did you shoot that as color or no?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So that's cool.
Now here's the Benny Goodman shot I told you about when I was 13. My first music photo, where I almost boiled off the.
There's that lovely contrast.
Years later, I printed this and was able to, kind of salvage it with what I was doing in the dark room. But the first print I made when I was 13 it just looked like a stain.
This image is the one that I was kind of caught me, and I was kind of curious the story behind this one.
This was a magazine job, and I was sent down to Mississippi, where Morgan has, I guess, one of his houses. But his house is on this big, I don't know if it was a cotton farm, but his parents were sharecroppers, basically, on this giant farm. And not sure what happened to his dad, but his mother lived there in this house for a long time. She ended up dying, but once Morgan became, rich and famous, he bought the farm and everything on it, and built his big house on it. So, and we had photographed during the day already, kind of finished up, but I said, can we go in, to your mother's house? And we went, and this is photographed on her bed, in her bedroom, where his mom lived for a lot of years. It's my favorite of the day. The magazine got some good ones. We got a lot of good photos that day, but this is my favorite.
There's just something in those eyes. You did a really nice job capturing those eyes, and I love the shallow depth of field. It's
I think we had spent the day together, and he's a great guy, and it was just the two of us. There was no assistant, just me and Morgan. We were out with his horses, and just hanging out, walking around. And by this point, we felt good around each other, and ended up with him on the edge of his mother's bed, and it just felt like the most real, whatever that means again, photo of the day.
I don't like that word when it comes to portraits. Yeah, it's like real at that time. at that moment, whatever that moment is.
I don't
Yeah.
trust that word when it comes to photography. So
I don't like, real or authentic. I don't like that word either. There's a few of them. And when you get into portraiture, it's really hard to say. And you're photographing famous people, and you're around these people that are.
The word has no, who cares if it's real? It's a portrait of somebody. I think it should just be good or not. And real.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's real?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Tom Petty in his backyard in the hills of Los Angeles.
So this is more directed at you. And it seems as if, would you call yourself a collector? Do you collect? Are you someone that collects things?
Are you referring to my photographs? Because
it seems that you were talking about, you're almost like photographing your own personal documentary. And in some ways, these photographs and meeting these folks and having these very interesting sessions and meetings and stuff, it has a very methodical collecting kind of feel to it. Would you call yourself a collector? Would you say you are? And it takes many forms.
I've jokingly called like my climber's book, well, I've said that it's not butterfly collecting, even though there was a search going around the world. There were some certain ticks that I had to check off about what I was looking for. We'll talk about that soon. But am I a collector of?
It takes many forms.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the photography is concerned, I guess in the music world, that once I started documenting these musicians, then I did kind of want, especially a lot of the old country stuff. I mean, getting someone, America has all this regional country, the Bakersfield, California sound and the Appalachian sound and Texas, and
yeah, it's so true.
Your
punk music is the same. Yeah.
If you start kind of documenting these things, you want to sort of maybe get some representatives of, areas, I guess. But I also learned to dismiss all that. There was a feeling through part of my career, if you want to call it that felt like I had to do that. But then I also dismissed it later on as well. And I'll tell you why with the climber book. Tom Petty again. I shot him. So he was a turning point in my music career because he was the first big one that hired me and kept me around for a couple years, 2 or 3 years. And, we got to be friends, and I photographed him and his band for all kinds of stuff. And, he was a superstar at the time. This is in the late 80s. So having Tom Petty in the portfolio suddenly made me trustable by everyone. And, it meant that I could photograph anyone. Well, he's photographed Tom Petty. Obviously, we can trust him with our person, which is,
It makes sense. Yeah, it's that seminal moment that kind of launches your portfolio. And I love that story that you said, that there was, you said he kind of held the door open for you, and he said, "I'll see you tomorrow," kind of thing. Tell that story, and then we'll move to climbers. I love this story.
Well, so I had gotten to know this guy, A. West, who talk about characters. But I got to know this guy, and he was a designer and let's just call him an art director of various things. But we became friends, and he had been working on Bob Dylan stuff and Billy Idol and all these things through this management, East End management. And I was at his house one day, had my camera, and he said, "I'm going over to Tom Petty's rehearsing over in the valley. You want to go over there? So I went over there with him, and we hung out for a couple hours, and I took some photos. Everybody's groovy. And then as we're leaving, Tom says, "See you tomorrow." And that was the beginning of, 2 or 3 years of working with him.
So did you just kind of become a part of their world, just another person that they would check in on? How did that start? Were you, I'm just so fascinated by that.
Back to the rehearsals. They were rehearsing in Joe's Garage, which was Frank Zappa's place over in the valley. Then I got hired to shoot stills on videos, and I shot just hanging out, like going to their houses,
hanging out.
Portraits, shot a couple tour books. Just hanging out, really. And
that's awesome.
It really was. When I think back of it, just a lot of hanging out and shooting and managing to get good pictures that they liked. It was never super duper formal.
And I think that's what I like about it, is it was,
That's the way I like it. I mean,
yeah. It was so relaxed, and it was like, there's no pressure. It was just, you were around music, which you love, Tom Petty, of course, and then you were doing something that you love at the exact same time. And it was, you had talked about this before, it was two things that just came together. And just so happened to be like that. And it kind of launched you on this journey of now photographing and meeting people you were interested in. And I just think that is just, do you believe in fate when you think about that?
I believe in some kind of something. I don't know if it's the words that people like to use, like fate and all that, but no, there's definitely something going on.
Yeah, because like it doesn't like
too many times for me to discount it. So,
well, and that's my thing, is that like this doesn't seem like it wasn't yours, like your path, like this was like something that you were meant to do. Like, come on, how many people have that kind of a moment where you just hang out with Tom Petty one day and then he holds open the door and says, "See you tomorrow," and then 2 years later, you know what I mean? That just seems, there's no pressure. There's no pushing. Like, I have a very wise mentor that tells me all the time, do not push the river. Do not push the river. Go with the flow with things. Well, I just flow with it.
I agree with that. I think I also believe in it. If you want something, just, start kind of doing it. I don't know, that sounds simple, but you just got to be. If you're wanting something, start being it. Don't ask for permission and don't wish. Just start being, and people will just accept that you are.
Write that down and put that on a T-shirt. Like, seriously. Like, wow, Nike, are you listening? I think they just took that.
Find out for myself.
Just do it, right?
This week.
That's your moment right there. I really wanted to kind of get to that feeling that you were just saying, and I'm going to stop sharing the portraits. And I love the fact that you just kind of started to do what it is that you wanted to do and just didn't, like settle for anything else. And what I love is that it also translated into this next project. And you were chasing something, and I don't know what you were chasing per se, but you started to get interested in climbers, and you started to spend your last $100 to go and meet some of these people. Like, you were so invested in this that like you did it no matter what. And I think there's something about that I think is really, really important today, where people are waiting for validation and all this stuff. And you were just doing it, and no one was asking you. You were just doing it. And so talk to me a little bit about you were doing I see a connection, and you mentioned it in an interview that you did before, between the portraits of musicians. But you started to be interested in climbing. So talk to me about where that came from, why you started that, and how you started to kind of line that up, and we'll start to look at that project.
Just like the music stuff, where I was self-assigning and looking for this kind of history and story of this music that I really loved, and also learning about it. Obviously, whenever you do something like this, you're learning as you go. Otherwise, why would you do it? And it seems like everything that I'm interested in, I want to get into the deep history of. So a lot of things happened when I was 13, not just that Benny Goodman photo and my first camera, but I also went climbing for the first time, tied into a rope, and did actual rock climbing, which I had wanted to do for a long time. In those Life magazines that I've been talking about, I had seen climbers in the French Alps, these beautiful shots of climbers waving ice axes, and that looked like, I loved the outdoors and I loved physical exertion, but I wasn't much of a kind of a sports ball person. And I was trying to figure out what to do with all my physical energy. And once I discovered climbing, I knew that was something that I liked. So I finally got into it, started climbing at 13, and started reading, just like I did with music and photography, reading the history books and getting very, very interested about that. And especially the Sierra Nevada mountains of California, where Ansel Adams was from there. So as a young photographer, I would have seen his photos of the Yosemite and the Sierra. But in general, there's a lot of history there with movie making. The Sierra just kept showing up in my face somehow. And I moved to California in the 80s, and I started climbing there and did a lot of research and reading about it, and the climbers who had been there in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And at some point in the 90s, I decided I wanted that two climbers from the 1920s were still alive from the Sierra Nevada of California. And the same enthusiasm I have when I discover any of these characters, like the old music people, it's a self-assignment. I just get this kind of emotional urge to go photograph them. And so that's what I did. I went out to California and got both of these guys, who were partners together. They had done the first ascent of the east face of Mount Whitney in 1920 or 29 or 30. I think it's 1930, but they had been climbing in the 20s. And so I photographed them, got good photos, treated it very seriously, as I always do. I don't know why I have to say that, but these self-assigned were more serious than anything else I ever did. But, and that was it. I photographed these guys, but then I thought, who else is alive there? So I started searching in the Sierra Nevada, and I started finding more of these climbers from the 30s, from the 1940s, 1950s. And I got some more of them, and I started thinking, well, maybe there's maybe I could do a little magazine story, or as I got even a few more, I thought maybe there's a little slim volume. Maybe I could do a little book, or I didn't know what. I didn't even really care. I liked that I was going to get some stories out of these people and meet them. And, these are people I would have seen in some on my bookcase in these old 1930s photos. It was always a thrill for me, as I've already said in this podcast. It's like a time machine. I really find something valuable and exciting about, they say don't meet your heroes. These are not all heroes, but I disagree with that. I think, why not? And if you don't like them, well, that's life. That's your problem, not theirs.
I've never heard that. I've actually said that to people before, but that's your problem. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, you can't blame them. It was your preconception that may be disappointed. So, well, anyway, that's another subject.
Yeah. It's another thing. Yeah.
I love meeting these people and seeing, the greatness. Now, whether they're great like Keith Richards, legendary status, or they're this kind of unknown climber, to me, it's all the same. Somebody, I've read about this legendary climb up the East Face. I've been reading about all my life. I just love going to see these people who've had a little finger on the way, things have gone in the world, for better or for worse, minor or major. So that's my weird little thrill about it. So I started accumulating these photos of climbers from the Sierra Nevada. Nobody seemed to care at all about this, by the way, as I told my different girlfriends, complete boredom. Even climbers I was telling, they're like, why are you doing this? You're not photographing them climbing. A lot of these people don't climb anymore. They're too old. People just didn't get it. Then I photographed someone from Boston who had climbed, Bradford Washburn, who had climbed in Alaska in the 1930s. So suddenly it wasn't just Sierra Nevada. It was kind of, okay, I'm doing this thing with Americans. And yeah, you had said earlier, I was spending money to go do this, film and processing, airplane tickets, spending my last dollars in the bank account many times to go find these people. And it just started building up. And I was wondering what I was going to do with this. And this started in the mid 1990s. And occasionally, as some years went on, I was getting more American climbers in general. And then I started thinking, what about Europe? Oh, man, it's expensive to go over there. And and this was also in the early days of the internet, where, or even no internet really when it started. And sometimes you would write a letter and wait for 3 months for it to come back. No, he's dead. He won't be doing it. So it's very slow to get information. Are these people still alive? Could I come see you? But that's the way it was. Very old school, analog, everything about it. And but then I got interested in Riccardo Cassin, who was one of the great European climbers, one of the great Italian climbers. And again, he started climbing in the 20s and climbed in the 30s. An amazing career around the world, the Alps and Alaska and all over the place. So there took some effort to get in contact with them, but finally I found myself going up to his house as he's dying. He's 100 years old. He's in a chair, parked in front of an open window, looking over the Italian Alps. And he's dying, and his family's out in the yard, and they're in the kitchen, and kids, great-grandkids, great-great-grandkids are just, it's a vigil. It's going on for days or weeks. And this is the situation I walk into. Nobody speaks the other one's language. Very sensitive occasion with the man dying. And there I am with a camera. um, trying to be cool and fit in as well as one can. But I was, accepted, and I got a shot of the old man, and he died 6 days later.
Oh my gosh.
So anyway, getting that shot turned this into now an international project. Wasn't just Sierra Nevada. It wasn't just America. Now, oh my God, I'm still doing this completely alone, by myself, under my own speed, whenever I could get a little bit of money, sleeping under bridges, just some very dicey travel plans, going over there with one-way tickets and very unsure. Again, nobody seems to care about this project. And somehow I stubbornly keep doing it. I think because nobody got it is what made me like it so much.
Don't you? It's like climbing is its own little world. Do they know each other? Is it a small community?
I guess it still is. I mean, now it's huge. It's a huge community. It's I think there's climbing in the Olympics now. I don't know. It's a huge community. But even then, in a weird way, it's still kind of small. But certainly, when you're talking about these guys that are in my book, they would have known of each other for sure, especially the ones in similar decades. There were just handfuls of them in pockets around the world, in the French Alps, in the California West. But they would have known about each other. There was a literary tradition in mountaineering, with some great books and maps and things recorded, things documented. And especially these older generations, even my generation, I've got the books right here, and a lot of these books that I'm looking at would have been in Ricardo's bookshelves and Royal Robbins in California, his bookshelf, even though he wrote some of them. So, yeah, there was a shared history, a shared interest and knowledge, and these guys, if they didn't actually climb together, they would have known of each other for sure, yeah.
Well, I know there was, there's that one movie that came out in the 90s with Brad Pitt, 7 Years in Tibet. He was a climber, and a famous one. And you had those different. I know there is a whole lore around it, and I know there's these amazing stories that come out of it, and it makes it's fascinating. You were saying that no one cares about it, but there's maybe. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's climbing is such a personal thing? Do you think it's like such a self-driven thing that I'm curious.
Well, this thing has been so interesting, this project. It's so unlikely that it's, it just got translated and published in Italy. So it's in its second life now going on. Just did the first part of the book tour. I'm going back in May to continue it. And it's being published in Korea at the end of the year.
Oh, wow.
But, for really a thing that not many people seem that interested in, but they are interested, as it turns out. Maybe I just didn't have the right girlfriends. I don't know.
Maybe.
But it's also, in a weird way, it's the younger gym climbers, the sort of indoor climbers, they actually don't seem that interested in it. They're not the ones that are kind of showing up at my book events so much as other people who just like the story, despite it being about climbing. There's kind of a lot going on just with finding these people at the age that they're at, who've spent, a considerable part of their life very obsessed with something, which was this activity, this kind of useless activity called climbing. I think people kind of react to that. They react to the photography, I guess, maybe as well. But certainly, the way these people have spent their lives, and now they're in this kind of these later years where a lot of them can't do it anymore. And it's kind of similar to the way that even the musicians that I shot, these are both people that are out on the fringes of society, musicians and climbers for sure.
That's the connection that I saw. Yeah.
Well, people have always asked me, how do you go from shooting rock stars to climbers? But they're similar in a lot of ways. Like I said, they're on the fringes. It's hard to be good at both of these things, playing a guitar, singing, and writing songs or climbing mountains. There's a lot of time away from your spouse, your wife, your partner. There's a lot of dodgy finances. There's a lot of obsession that you need to be good and to stay in the game. And then when you get old, as it is for, I guess, anybody getting old, you can't partake anymore. But it's an interesting time to find people, not when they're full of testosterone and energy, but it's a different way to represent. There's plenty of people being photographed climbing on upside down roofs, doing incredible things. And I love seeing that stuff. But similar to the music, I like seeing the other side of the business, so to speak. What's it like when you're finished? What's it like when you're not doing it?
Do you see the connection between the way you photograph musicians to the way you photograph these climbers?
Absolutely.
Do you see the connection? Yeah, I see it too.
I guess so.
It's just the same reason I asked you. It's the first time I saw a guitar in somebody's hand. You know what I mean? Whereas you had these very candid moments, why do you think you do that?
I don't know.
What is it about those? Go ahead.
I've had people come up to me time and time again at these, places where I speak, and they're kind of gobsmacked that I'm photographing these old climbers not climbing, not even in the mountains, in their living rooms. And, I honestly didn't give it that much thought until people started asking me about it. To me, it was just a natural way. This is where they are at this point. I guess I did think about it subconsciously, but it didn't seem surprising to me. It seemed like exactly the way that I should do it.
There's something about
that they're not climbing. I don't know. I guess I blew past the obvious part straight to the interesting part to me.
Well, I think there's something about it. I was telling you earlier that I grew up around a lot of famous people. My mom was in the film business. And so you see this, there's this other part to life that is not the adventure that people are known for, and there's so much of this life that is happening that makes you human. I think there's this common human experience. But I think what's interesting is that there's also these stories that are really, really interesting that people have, and they collect these stories, whether it's in mountain climbing or these musicians or what have you. But yet there's this something else. And I see it in your photograph. I have a hard time putting words to it. And I'm kind of curious if you've taken the time to think about that, or you know what I mean? I'm trying to put words to it, and I'm having a hard time with it because I'm such a visual person in some ways. Do you know what I'm asking here? Or do you know what I'm pointing to?
Say it again. Are you talking about the fact that these are older people climbing?
No,
Or,
there's the legend, and then there's the person.
oh yeah. Okay.
And you know what I mean? And you seem to have an appreciation that goes beyond the legend. And the legend is interesting, but it's almost like you're fascinated by the person that holds the legend, and like, and you're photographing people in a way that is very human. And I like it. I love it. And I love that approach. And it's one of the reasons why I thought it was absolutely perfect to photograph these climbers at a time when they're not climbing. It's almost cliche in a way to put them in their equipment, or, you know what I mean? You're doing something else. And I was curious if you can kind of, if you've taken the time to dissect that, or maybe you just alluded to it in your previous answer. You're like, I didn't really ever think about it. I just felt like this is that time, and this is where they were, and I wanted to.
I thought about it without thinking about it. I think that I had reached. I think I had reached the conclusion that this was a good way to approach it pretty quick. I don't think I needed to play it out, because I already knew this was the correct, for me, way to do it. I have seen all of the great pictures of them climbing. They're super beautiful and inspiring. I love the shots of, seeing these climbers in places. But, I went through the philosophy it all pretty quick to get to the point of I want to see these people in their environment. Putting it into words makes it sound kind of cheesy and cliche. It's hard to.
Yeah, I know it's tough because.
It's
funny.
It's very intentional what I was doing. That's the thing about the book tour, is it has, made me put these thoughts out into the air when they were really just like in a lava lamp in my brain. I knew how I wanted to do it, and I knew this was different, and seeing these aged people. I think it gives you an imagination, the viewer, me, whoever's looking at the pictures. If you know what they did, it makes your imagination kind of run wild. Imagining them at 29 or 35 years old on the north face of the Eiger in crummy, leather boots and hemp rope, and really being cold because the gear wasn't good. And, with just terrible gear is what I think of a lot. These guys climbing stuff that's still hard today with the modern gear, which changes things so much than the way these guys were doing it. That's part of it. Look, if it was all... yeah, go ahead.
It did... Well, like, I'm kind of curious about this part. Did you hear the stories first? Did you read about these people first? And through your own kind of research, and then through that research, then kind of identify somebody to kind of go and meet?
Well, I started off picking the ones that I knew about.
Yeah.
And especially in the California Sierra, I was very familiar with that history and those climbers. But, as the project went on and I started getting deeper, then of course I was learning about others, or maybe ones that I just barely heard of in passing and wanted to learn more about. So I think that's what you should do when you have a project that's almost 2 decades old, is hopefully you start learning and expanding your viewpoint. That's what makes the project interesting. So yeah, I started learning more, finding, and people would suggest people. It's like, oh, you should get this person in, wherever, France. So I discovered people. Oh, it's like, oh, his climbing partner. I didn't know it, and this connects. So, yeah, I was doing more and more research as time went on. Well, for instance, when I was in Japan, I went there specifically to photograph Junko Tabe, who was the first female ever to summit Mount Everest. And Japan was a hard one for me to research just because, as you can imagine, it's a difficult language, even with Google Translate. It's a hard country to research. But when I was in Tokyo photographing her, she told me about Minoru Higeta. And I can show you some of these while we talk to make it interesting. This is Junko, and I photographed her. She climbed Everest in the early 70s. But while I was with her, she said, "Oh, you must photograph Minoru Higeta, who was climbing in the Himalaya in the 50s." And so I went to, see him the next day. Well, I mean, this one's a good story. So she said, "You must photograph Minoru Higeta." I said, "Absolutely." She told me a little bit of his story. I said, "Yes, I must." But she said he leaves tomorrow morning to fly out of the country. And I'm like, "Oh, what time?" Which she thought, wow, this guy's obsessed. And she said, well, he flies out of Tokyo Narita Airport, which is like 2 hours from Tokyo. It's nowhere close to Tokyo, at 7 a.m. So I ended up arranging it. They said, well, he could do it. He would like to do it, but you have to meet him at the airport and he can give you like 60 seconds. And I said, that's all I need. So I got up at 3 a.m, took the train to Narita, got there at 5 a.m, whatever it was, waited around at the prescribed spot, and there comes Minoru with his family walking into the airport. He stopped. I shot 4 frames on my Leica, and he bowed and kept going. But it ended up being one of my favorite portraits in the book because it's so kind of formal and Japanese, and he's just perfect.
It's great. It's a good story. Like, was there any particular story that kind of stood out to you?
Oh,
any one that really just kind of...
Well, they're all pretty incredible stories. I've got Chuck Pratt, who was one of the great free climbers of the 50s and 60s, mostly known for his Yosemite climbs. David Brower, who was climbing and backcountry skiing in the Sierra in the 20s and 30s and 40s.
How much time did you spend talking with these people? Did you spend any time talking, sharing stories?
Yeah, like Bradford Washburn. I went to, that looks very dark on my screen. I don't know how it looks better on the book cover. I spent the night at his house. I flew to Boston, and, he let me camp out on his couch. And so we had a meal together. Reinhold Messner, who famously, if anybody knows about Reinhold, he's one of the great legendary climbers of all time. He was the first to climb Everest with no oxygen. He also climbed it with no oxygen by a new route solo. He's a remarkable human being, and he's also one of the great writer philosophers of climbing. He's also a hard ass and is a bit of a difficult person, as he will probably admit himself. And I tried for several years to get Reinhold, and his people said, he won't do it, or he'll charge you money. Or that's what other people said, and I wasn't getting any response. Finally, after I signed with my publisher, they were publishing one of his books, and they had a little connection, so they made it happen. in Seattle, and I photographed him in this vacant ballroom of this old historic hotel, just the two of us. And, he was giving me the Reinhold attitude, and I was looking through Hasselblad, looking at him, and he's just a terse Teutonic. And finally I looked up and I said, "Reinhold, you're scaring all of us." And I said that for all of humanity, all of us. And he finally chuckled and saw a little glimpse of a crack in the armor. And then we got along pretty good. But
you do a wonderful job writing about this, and so anyone listening, you definitely should read the way he writes about these individual people. There was one particular person. I forget the first name right now, but Beckey, this guy who was the first to climb all these different. I'm kind of curious about this gentleman.
Fred Beckey, I photographed 3 different times, which is the only person in this whole project that I photographed even twice. The first time was in the Tetons of Wyoming, and the photo was fine. I could have used it in the book if that's all I had. I wasn't crazy about it. Photographed him again in a pizza parlor in Chicago. I could have used that shot, but this was the keeper of all time, and it's one of my favorite portraits that I've ever done. But Fred Beckey, for those that don't know, is an American from Washington State. Actually, I think he was born in Germany, but they moved to America when he was young. And he did more first ascents than maybe anybody ever. He was obsessed with finding new routes, difficult routes on just classic faces and ridges and arêtes from Canada, I think Alaska, on anywhere he could find them. He's very secretive. He had books and lists and papers of these things he didn't want anyone to know about, lest they steal the first ascent from him. He lived to climb. There's a term called a dirt bag. These kind of dirt bag climbers, they camp out. They live a very nomadic kind of existence. He was probably one of the original dirt bags who just lived out of his car, but extremely gifted climber, a very well-read, studious. He wrote guidebooks and journals that were very intricate, elaborate descriptions of the geography, and routes of the Cascade Mountains, especially his home range. And he climbed and climbed and climbed into at least his 90s. I think he was still climbing at 90, 91. And finally, this last shot was also in Seattle in this old hotel lobby. And he came in this time kind of exhausted just from life, from a lifetime of going around the world, around the continent, climbing endlessly. And he came in and he laid on the couch and he crossed his arms like he was in the coffin, just staring at the ceiling, kicked his shoes off before he did it, laid down like he was giving me his death mask. And I immediately climbed up on the sofa and started shooting him. And we didn't speak for 15 or 20 minutes. And he was just, this is not like an actor or a Shakespearean actor or, it's Fred Beckey, the dirtbag climber, but he's just giving me these faces, looking into the camera. And he knew what he was doing, and I loved it. And the shots I got so many good shots. Everything was good. Luckily, the light kept being good, but he wasn't joking around. It was so strange and interesting. And and kind of valid. And he died a year or two later. I mean, he was on his way out. His climbing was pretty much over. So he was giving me this final photo shoot kind of thing that was kind of macabre and beautiful.
There's a little shadow from his shoulder and his head that forms kind of a little mountain range on the back.
It's it's incredible piece of luck that.
Yeah. Did you notice that, or is that just me looking too far into this?
I don't remember if I noticed it or not.
Yeah,
I might have, or I. The thing is
it's just
the flash. You know, you don't really see the flash. I kind of work by instinct, and this was flash. I kind of know what it's going to basically do, but in the old days, I might have shot a Polaroid, but the Polaroid days are over. There is no Polaroid. So I'm just working with instinct. I kind of know how the light's going to be on him. I know it's going to be on the background. Did I know it was going to mirror that other peak shape to make a second peak shape and thus create a kind of a mountain range? I don't know if I knew it or not, but I am happy that it happened.
Yeah, he kind of became one himself. You know, he's living in that shadow
front range. You know,
yeah, it's a good one for sure. Like, I do have one question. What do you think the common attribute between climbers is that you have noticed?
Yeah, I get asked that, and I don't know what the common attribute would be, because if you look in the Victorian days, there wasn't a leisure class really that climbed, or a working class rather. It was more of the leisure class, people of means. And, you know, climbing as something that we know about was kind of invented by the well-heeled Brits, really, that would go to the French Alps and, hire these kind of guides that were kind of mysteriously already there. But climbing as sport, getting these first ascents, that was people that had money, that could travel, that had free time. But it wasn't until, kind of after the turn of the century that you started getting a more working class type of people that would go climb. But anyway, what that resulted in was that you had people from all spectrums. You had very well educated, very well moneyed, and you had dirtbag kind of poor people that working class. So they didn't have that in common necessarily. So, a sense of adventure, a sense of, it is interesting when you get climbers together talking about climbing. It doesn't matter if you went to Yale and came from generations of Yale graduates and your partner is a car mechanic. As soon as you're on a climb together, it's the brotherhood of the rope.
So talk to me a little bit about the final product, how it came together and how you thought about putting it together.
Well, it's just, I'm sure I took years off my life on this book. I was able to get my friend Beth Meadowworth on as designer. We had worked on 1 million album covers together and things, and many late nights drinking port, and just one of my best friends. But she actually, I have to say, was always a supporter of this project. And she said, I want to do the book. So I had to fight for her to get on it, but I did, and she ended up doing it. So that was great. I had a good, sympathetic person on the design aspect. And so we worked close. Man, it was hard work putting this together. I went out to, I had some friends that had a ranch underneath the Sierra Nevada mountains in California, and they had a guest house, and they said, invited me, or I invited myself, I can't remember, to go and do the writing and really start the editing of the photos and putting everything together. Yeah, it's hard work. This ended up being 19 years long project. And so I felt a lot of stress to get it right. I wanted the choice of frames, the printing, that had to be good. The design had to be good. The writing had to be good. And I was it's my first time of doing a lot of writing that would be living forever in this book. So it was hard work.
The writing complements the portraits that you did so well. And
well, thank you.
I really enjoyed the stories, and I think the final product is fantastic. I'm not surprised you're getting into multiple languages and it's starting to go around the world. And so it's one of those labors of, would you call it a labor of love, or was it an obsession? What would you call that? An obsession?
Well, I would call it a labor of hate. There was, the whole thing was difficult. I mean, I guess, at some point, I'll try to tell it in linear shape. So the book, we finally finish it. And with a beautiful slipcase, it was a monumental job putting this thing together. And finally it's together. And at the last minute, for reasons I won't go into, but it wasn't going to be in the Banff Film and Book Festival, but it got entered at the last second. And it won the grand prize, which ended up being just pivotal, because all these other film festivals around the world heard about it. And then I started getting invited to these other festivals. And, I don't know what I expected. I really thought, just to have this book finished and to have the project done would have been reason enough to do it. I didn't have much of a plan for what would happen after having a book. I just wanted a few people to have it, and I really thought it would be a few people. But, it's kind of astounding. The thing, after the prize at Banff, things it took on a life of its own, and it's just kind of become this weird global thing that won't die. That it came out in 2017, and I really thought a few friends and my parents would have it. And now the fact that I'm still on this never-ending book tour surprises me more than.
Well, my final question is, my audience is pretty much, photographers, image makers, and people that kind of have that same kind of spark. They want to make images. So if you could give any kind of advice for anybody that wants to do this, what would it be?
I think just do what you like doing, because sooner or later you're going to figure out, and other people will figure out, importantly, that if you're kind of faking it, if you're doing things to get work, you got to go after your real love, and people will notice that, and you'll do your best work. We've all felt the pressure or the pull to please people, especially when you're young and you want to get work. You want to work for a magazine, whatever it is you want to do. You feel like your work needs to look like this person's, or I got to do this to get hired by these people. But the sooner you learn to trust your gut and go on your own instinct and get passionate about what turns you on, even if it's different, especially if it's different, you'll be better off. Do the stuff that turns you on, and sooner or later people will reward you for it.
It just lines up. I think that's a perfect way to end this episode. Thank you so much for coming on today. Really, it was. I
enjoyed it. Great conversation.
You took me all over the world, right there. Mountain climbers to musicians, and seeing faces I grew up with, and getting to know faces I didn't know. And it was a treat today. Thank you so much.
That was the short version. Thank you.
Maybe we can have a beer later, and we can have another moment doing that. That would be great. When you make your way through Paris, let's do it. But thank you again. And to everyone that's made it this far, thank you so much for joining us today on the Urbanaut Podcast. If you like content like this, please consider liking, sharing, and commenting down below. That actually helps us with the algorithm, and it helps get this kind of content in front of others out there as well. And as always, we'll see you next time.